Hi, I'm Risa, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. If you've been a while on my channel, you've probably heard about my project of reading a book from each country of the world. So I got Micronesia, and unfortunately my original review was, the file was corrupted, so this is a different style of review than what I usually do, because usually I have some more reading vlog style for this. This book is a book I've read, used several times for this project already. It's a book about from different countries that is in Micronesia, and that is one of the things that I enjoyed with this book, that it sort of talked about the difference between Micronesia as an area and the federate states of Micronesia, which is the country that we usually refer to as Micronesia. So in this book you sort of see a map where you have the different areas in sort of the area Micronesia. And the reason why this is important is because, of course, you have Marshall Islands, Kiribati, Nauru, and Palau, in addition to Federate State of Micronesia. But you also have Northern Mariana Islands and Guam. And Guam is a territory, not a federal independent country. Guam is one of the overseas territories of the United States, and I'm not going to go into more details about how that is in essence, because that's not my place to talk about. That's not what I want to talk about on this channel, but do learn more about that. So I've went through the book. So the book is a section of shorter texts, but the texts are very varied. So you have everything from non-fictions, essays, to legal texts, to poems, to short stories. And so I've sort of went and color coded all of them based on the author's country. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about Micronesia. As you say, Micronesia is purple, so Micronesia is actually fairly represented in this book. And I wanted to read from the Constitution of the Federate States of Micronesia, 1975, because that's one of the things I love about this book specifically, and how varied the texts are, because it does say something about Micronesia's culture and sort of the discourse about sort of their national identity. We, the people of Micronesia, exercise our inherent sovereignty, do hereby establish the Constitution of Federate States of Micronesia. With this Constitution, we affirm our common wish to live together in peace and harmony, to preserve the heritage of the past, and to protect the promise of the future. To make one nation of many islands, we respect the diversity of our cultures. Our differences enrich us. The seas bring us together, they do not separate us. Our islands sustain us, our island nation enlarges us and makes us stronger. So one of the things that I really enjoyed with then reading Micronesia, sort of with the lens of how Micronesia, and again when I'm talking about Micronesia now I'm talking about the Federate State of Micronesia, understand themselves, is that they are one people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are similar to one another, which is very different from the way I've been trained to look and understand sort of a national entity which is more based on European traditions, or the way you have in, for example, the US, where it's a melting pot, where the idea is that we are going to come together and together create a form of American identity. Well, what I read out of this, and if you don't agree, or if you're saying, oh, that's a wrong reading, please let me know, because it would be so sad if sort of my reading or interpretation of it was wrong, is that we will be together, but it's because we are different that we are able to become a strong nation. And that is one of the sort of themes that you find in a lot of the texts that the authors from Micronesia represent. They're talking about how are we viewed by others, how do we view ourselves, how do we view our own culture in regard to the colonial history of a lot of the ethnic groups in Micronesia. There is a brilliant text here about the written language that came with the Bible, and talking about how the Bible was something that the patriarchal society of this ethnic group really embraced, because it was a way of to confirm the patriarchal ideas. And because the Bible was then written, you had an issue with, well, how can we change something that is written? How can we develop out of this patriarchal idea now that things are written down? So the discussion that this author has with regard to how do we view ourselves through sort of the not just the incorporation of Christianity and the Bible through missionaries, but through the written language. The moment that something is written down, it's so much harder to change, rather than if things stay on sort of an oral level. So there is so many wonderful ways of understanding how do we view ourselves when we are different, and we want to be different, and we need to be different from one another. In addition to sort of the themes of how do we view each other, there is an author from, I think it's pronounced Chuk. I think it sort of talks about how the Chuk culture has been viewed by others from Micronesia, and but there's also a lot of talk about how do Micronesians, how they understood from the imperial powers. So they're talking about, especially when it comes to United States. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Guam is a territory, and the US did have a lot of other states that they sort of had control over before they became independent. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the US doesn't play a huge part in regard to, for example, the economy. So there is a wonderful, I think I'm actually going to see if I can find it so I can just read. You got the first sort of chapter of it, because I think it's a wonderful way of retelling. Yeah, here it is. Because it's a retelling of the Lord's Prayer. Our fathers, who art in Washington, hallowed be thy funds. Thy authorizations come, thy appropriations be done, in Saipan as they are in the President's budget office. So that is a very clever way for someone to understand or sort of deal with the aspect that this is a country that is dependent economically to the US, even if they are still an independent country, because of the consequences that happened because the US involvements in their country. So there is, and there is also a discussion in one of the texts here that talk about Micronesian, the Micronesian question, where they are talking about the people who are Micronesian who had to move to Hawaii because of a flood, and talking about what is a Micronesian. No, not a Polynesian, not a Melanesian, Micronesian, Micronesian, Micronesian. Micro, small, minuscule, invisible, ignored, isolated, distant, tiny island. Micronesian, migrating, moving, island hopping, on continental air Mike, departing from our island, descending upon the US, who gave us permission back in '86. So because there was such a huge population of Micronesians who moved to Hawaii, what does that deal with, what does that do to their understanding of the Micronesian identity? So I am very glad that I think this Micronesian literature was the literature I had most fun with reading it. That probably is because there is so many of them. They're so varied in texts. I still had the biggest "what is this" when reading about Nauru, but that's also because that was the first time I learned about Nauru history, which is what the wild story, absolutely wild story. But the wonderful text. And if you have any other books or recommendations for, again, this is a collective work, so if you have any other books by Micronesian authors living in Micronesia when the books were published, please let me know in the comments down below. And thank you for listening to me screaming into the void.